Morning again, everybody. And I was told summer services are a bit more relaxed. I didn't know it was going to get quite this relaxed, but here we are. We're having a good time. I want to thank a few people for helping me get to here today. First of all, big thanks to the musical team today, Sonia, Tim, and Jake, and John. And thanks to John B., who helped me with the musical selections, but he's off celebrating his birthday this weekend, and it's well-deserved. So, and also big thanks to David, Daryl, and Tony for helping me with selection of readings and working with some of the language. As I mentioned in the note, a lot of these things were written in the 1940s and 50s, so language has shifted in the last 80 years, and we wanted to make sure that we both conveyed the original meaning of the text, but also make sure that we were speaking respectfully to our modern day community. So, we need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. Bayard Rustin wrote these words in 1948 on his return from India, where he was meeting with students of Mahatma Gandhi to learn more about their philosophy and practice of nonviolent activism. These were not new concepts to Rustin, who had been following the lessons of Gandhi since the early 1940s. In fact, the idea of nonviolent activism was part of Rustin's lifelong calling, which began not far from here in Westchester. Bayard Rustin was born in Westchester in 1912. His grandparents brought him up with their Quaker values, which, Rustin said, were based on the concept of a single human family and the belief that all members of that family are equal. Westchester remained a segregated city at that time, however, and despite his classmates' acceptance of him as a member of the high school football team, he was not allowed to eat with the team at restaurants after games because of his skin color. As a young man, Rustin also knew that he preferred boys to girls, a fact that his grandmother met with a simple, "I suppose that's what you need to do." Rustin never felt the need to hide his homosexuality, a fact that would lead him into various troubles in his adult life. After high school, Rustin attended Cheney Training School for Teachers, now Cheney University, an HBCU in Delaware County. But for reasons he never disclosed, he was expelled in 1937 and moved to New York City, where he would live for the rest of his life. Upon moving to New York, he befriended actor Paul Robeson, another black Quaker with a passion for social activism. Rustin was also briefly affiliated with the Young Communist League, another association which would cause trouble as this brought him to the attention of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI at the height of the Red Scare. He did not stay with the organization long, however, as they refused to allow him to agitate in favor of desegregation of the military. Rustin found himself in conflict with the law on many occasions, much of it stemming from his Quaker beliefs and his commitment to activism and pacifism. His first arrest occurred in 1944, when he refused to register for the draft during World War II. He would spend 26 months in prison, earning the anger of prison officials due to his continued protests for desegregation within the prison. In 1947, he led the Journey of Reconciliation, a precursor to the Freedom Rides, and he was arrested in North Carolina and sentenced to 20 days on a chain gang for violating Jim Crow laws. The biggest blow to his activism, and the incident that would force him into a more background role, occurred in 1953, when Rustin was arrested in Pasadena, California for quote-unquote lewd conduct, allegedly for engaging in sexual activity with two white men. After his arrest, Rustin was forced out of his leadership role in the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He joined with A. Philip Randolph, a labor leader, and continued to teach and advise on nonviolent activism to other civil rights leaders. This work would lead Rustin to engage with the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott, and in particular, a young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. We know, thanks to the blue plaque on our front portico, that King attended a sermon right here in this building that first got him interested in the ideas of Gandhi and the use of nonviolent direct action. But when Rustin arrived in Montgomery, he saw these concepts were unevenly applied. Although the bus boycott relied on nonviolence, he saw that the homes of many of the leaders had armed guards. King himself, at the time, kept several firearms in his house for protection. After many long conversations, Rustin convinced King that a nonviolent leader must be seen to be nonviolent at all times, lest he give his followers conflicting messages. King eventually agreed to give up his guns and fully embraced the path of nonviolent activism. But even within the black community, there were tensions. Throughout his life, Rustin advocated first and foremost for a multiracial democracy, a stance that put him at odds with other, more separatist movements. When Rustin and King were in the process of planning to protest the Republican and Democratic National Conventions in 1960, in order to convince them to adopt platform planks against segregation, another black leader, Representative Adam Clayton Powell of New York, threatened to blackmail King by telling the press that King and Rustin were lovers. Rustin accepted that he would have to step back in order for the movement to proceed, and he again decided that if he were to be effective, his role would take him out of the spotlight. But it was from this position that Rustin would secure his greatest achievement for the civil rights movement. Ever since he'd known Tecumseh Philip Randolph in his labor activism days, Rustin was seen to have had a genius for organizing and mobilizing large groups of people. For over 20 years, Rustin and Randolph had envisioned a march on Washington, D.C. to demand an end to segregation in the workforce. In 1963, that vision came to fruition. If you know one thing about the 1963 March on Washington, it's the I Have a Dream speech. If you know two things about the march, you might know that the full name was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, or you might know that Joan Baez and Bob Dylan both performed there. But what many do not know is the staggering logistical effort it took to ensure that the event, expected to bring 150,000 participants and ending up with 250,000, would be successful. Rustin was the hand guiding these preparations. He organized charter buses, found donations for loudspeakers. He organized volunteers to prepare 80,000 box lunches to ensure people wouldn't go hungry. He had sprinklers attached to fire hydrants so people would be able to get drinking water and stay cool. He made sure there were enough portable toilets, 100 in all, as well as first aid stations. He recruited 4,000 non-uniformed police and firemen to act as parade marshals, training them in the nonviolent crowd control techniques that he'd learned while studying in India. And of course, the event was a success. Rustin was a complicated figure for the rest of his life. His support of democracy led him to some paradoxical associations, including the U.S. entry into the Vietnam War and ties to the neoconservative movement. His ties to the Democratic parties into the 1960s made him unpopular with the Black Panthers movement. Despite his early openness about his sexuality, his experiences in the 50s and 60s led him to go into the closet for several decades, only to reemerge in the 1980s at the height of the AIDS crisis. Bayard Rustin passed away in 1987 at the age of 75. In 2013, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. This biography is important to share because, as we've heard, Rustin's voice was often marginalized within the movement he helped to shape. Although his name is becoming more well-known, it's a shame that it took so long for documentaries, films, and books about him to proliferate the way they have in the last decade. But there's no point in simply sharing a biography as a sermon. You could read all these things in a book, a PBS article, or a Wikipedia page. So what does the life of a black gay Quaker man have to do with our lives today as Unitarian Universalists in this congregation, which is less so? For this, I come back to his famous quote: "We need, in every community, a group of angelic troublemakers." What does it mean to be an angelic troublemaker? How does making trouble comport with the idea of pacifism? How do we apply Rustin's teachings to the UU principles? The most important note, and one which Rustin often emphasized, is that pacifism should never be confused with passivity. In the reading earlier this morning, Rustin exhorts us that we must have a plan for facing immediate conflict. He calls it a shame that millions live in conditions of injustice while we make no effort to remedy the situation. So why choose a nonviolent approach? As you used, the spiritual foundation of nonviolence are woven into our 7 principles. To believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people is to believe that no person is deserving of harm. To strive for justice does not mean we sanction vengeance. To seek a world of peace, justice, and liberty for all is antithetical to the idea of achieving these ends with violent means. This is a value system we share with Quakers like Rustin, Hindus like Gandhi, and indeed with many religious traditions around the world. But Rustin, Gandhi, and others also saw nonviolent activism as pragmatic. Marginalized people, by definition, have less power in the dominant system. To mount a violent revolt might have led to a swift and overwhelming violent response. To be sure, the nonviolent activists of the civil rights movement expected they would be met with violence anyway, and they prepared and trained for this eventuality. But in maintaining a nonviolent attitude, by meeting fists and clubs with resolution and dignity, they knew they could make their attackers look desperate and their own cause righteous. When Rustin encouraged the 115 leaders of the Montgomery bus boycott to walk to the police station in their finest clothes and submit themselves for arrest, it calls to mind the striking image of a lone black woman in a dress facing down a line of armored police in Baton Rouge in 2016, calmly being arrested as she protested the violence that continues to be inflicted on her community by the dominant, racialized power structure. Knowing that nonviolence will often be met with violence, how do we build a movement that can still prevail? For Rustin, this meant building a multiracial coalition that not only supported, but identified with the struggle of African Americans. To be identified with the struggle required more than just words. Action and fighting side by side were required. These days, we might say, I don't need allies, I need accomplices. This, to me, is what our UU faith requires of us. When we extinguish the chalice every week, we speak of carrying with us the fire of commitment not just in words, but in deeds. In my time as part of this congregation, I've never known the First U community to shy away from causing a little trouble. I marched with many of you down the Ben Franklin Parkway in 2020 as we protested police violence in the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, or outside the Pennsylvania Convention Center demanding that all votes be counted. I've been to meetings with the Power Interfaith Coalition, where speakers have met our elected officials to drive them out of their comfort zones. I've seen it as we join hands across cultures to protest the dismantling of Chinatown by the billionaire owners of a basketball team. But there are folks in this congregation who may be unable or unwilling to put themselves on the front lines of struggle. People who cannot risk violence or arrest. People for whom events are not accessible because we fail to account for those of differing abilities. Rustin once again provides a model for how to participate in some angelic troublemaking. For every dozen people ready to get right up to the barricades at City Hall in 2020, I saw one person handing out water. I saw people carrying first aid kits, people with extra masks and hand sanitizer. I didn't see anyone making bologna sandwiches, but they might have been out there too. There were volunteer attorneys, organizers of bail funds, and people giving rides home from the police station at 2 a.m. when SEPTA was shut down for the night. A movement takes people with all sorts of contributions. As you use, our mission is to awaken love and justice in our community and in the world. A path of nonviolent activism, of angelic troublemaking, is one that seeks to inspire justice by bringing people together and demanding the change we want to see. Our world in 2023 needs no less change than the world Rustin saw in 1963. We are the ones called to act. Let's go make some angelic trouble together.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.